Respect has a hidden price, and most people discover it only after they have spent years giving too much of themselves away. They answer every call. They help whenever they are asked. They forgive quickly. They explain their decisions. They make themselves available. They try to understand everyone. They avoid conflict because they believe being kind will make people value them more. Then slowly, a disturbing pattern appears. The more they give, the more some people expect. The more they tolerate, the more certain people become that they can cross another boundary. The more they explain, the more their decisions become open to debate. And the moment they finally become tired, the people around them sometimes act surprised. This is where the psychology of value becomes uncomfortable. Respect is rarely decided by what you say you deserve. It is often shaped by what your behavior teaches other people to expect from you. People observe far more than you realize. They watch how you respond when someone disappoints you. They notice whether you keep your promises. They notice whether your words match your actions. They notice how quickly you abandon your priorities for someone else. They notice whether your boundaries have consequences. They notice how desperately you seek approval. And most importantly, they learn how much access they can have to your time, attention, emotions, and energy without giving the same value in return. This is where the darker side of human psychology begins. Respect is rarely about one dramatic moment. It is built through hundreds of tiny interactions that most people barely notice. A delayed response, a broken promise, a request you accepted even though you wanted to refuse, an insult you laughed away, a boundary you announced but never enforced. Each moment sends information. Each moment teaches people how to treat you. And once people learn a pattern, changing that pattern becomes much harder than creating it in the first place. This is why simply telling people to respect you rarely works. Demanding respect can create resistance. Acting aggressive can create fear. Trying to dominate everyone can create obedience for a moment, but it rarely creates genuine respect. There is a crucial difference between being feared, being obeyed, being liked, and being respected. These four things can look similar from the outside, but psychologically they are very different. A person can be feared and still be deeply disliked. A person can be powerful and still be viewed as cold. A person can be popular and still be treated casually. And a person can be extremely kind while receiving very little respect because their kindness has become predictable and their boundaries have become meaningless. The real question is therefore much deeper than, how do I make people respect me? The better question is, what does my behavior teach people about my value? This distinction changes everything. Psychological research separates power from status. Power is largely connected to control over resources, outcomes, or other people's options. Status is connected to being valued, respected, admired, or regarded as important by a group. These two forces can overlap, but they are not identical. A person can have power without having much status. A person can have status without controlling anyone. And one of the most interesting findings in this area is that status can combine perceptions of competence with warmth, while raw power can sometimes create an impression of dominance without the same sense of connection. That means becoming respected is rarely about becoming the loudest person in the room. It is about becoming someone whose presence communicates competence, self-control, consistency, and independence. This is where many people make their biggest mistake. They try to look valuable before becoming valuable. They try to appear confident instead of building confidence. They try to appear mysterious instead of developing a private life. They try to appear powerful instead of becoming emotionally independent. They try to make others jealous instead of creating a life they genuinely enjoy. These tactics may create temporary reactions, but they rarely create lasting respect. Real value works differently. It develops quietly. It becomes visible through patterns. A disciplined person does not need to constantly announce their discipline. A competent person does not need to explain their competence every 5 minutes. A confident person does not need every person in the room to approve of them. A person with strong boundaries does not need to deliver a dramatic speech every time someone crosses a line. Their behavior already communicates the message. And there is another psychological principle that makes this even more powerful. People learn from consequences. When a person repeatedly behaves badly and receives the same access, attention, trust, and forgiveness afterward, they have very little reason to change. Your words may say, "I will not tolerate this again," but your actions may say, "You can do this again, and I will still be here." Human behavior responds strongly to patterns of reward and consequence. This means respect often begins with a simple shift. Your words and actions have to start telling the same story. If you say your time matters, your behavior should reflect that. If you say you value honesty, your choices should reflect it. If you say a certain behavior crosses your boundary, your response should reflect it. This does not require cruelty. It does not require manipulation. It does not require becoming cold or selfish. It requires consistency. And consistency is one of the most underestimated forms of psychological power. In this video, you are going to learn 9 psychological principles that can completely change the way people perceive and respond to you. You will learn why constantly proving your value can actually weaken your position, and why quiet competence often creates a stronger impression than endless self-promotion. You will learn how dependency can create hidden power differences in relationships, and why becoming less emotionally dependent can change the way people treat you. You will learn why your availability matters, how excessive availability can reduce the perceived value of your attention, and why having your own priorities creates a different kind of presence. You will learn how over-explaining can turn simple decisions into negotiations, and why confident people often communicate boundaries with fewer words. You will discover why emotional reactions can become psychological buttons that other people learn to press, and how emotional self-control can remove that leverage. You will learn why consequences are often more powerful than warnings, why repeated disrespect continues when boundaries lack follow-through, and how quiet consistency can communicate strength without unnecessary confrontation. You will also learn why real competence matters more than appearances, why people often respect demonstrated ability more than claimed ability, and how building genuine value changes your position naturally. Then we will go deeper into information, observation, and privacy. You will discover why people who constantly reveal everything about themselves can give away more social information than they realize, while careful observation allows you to understand patterns that others overlook. And finally, we will reach the principle that may be the hardest one of all, the ability to walk away. Because the moment you become genuinely comfortable losing access to people who repeatedly disrespect you, your entire relationship with respect begins to change. You stop negotiating against yourself. You stop accepting treatment that destroys your peace. You stop chasing people who have already shown you where they stand. And you begin making decisions from self-respect instead of fear. Stay, because the final principle connects all 9 ideas together, and it reveals why the strongest form of respect often appears when you stop trying so hard to obtain it. The goal of this video is not to teach you how to intimidate people. It is to show you how human beings form judgments about value, status, confidence, competence, and boundaries, and how you can use that understanding to become harder to manipulate and easier to respect. Once you understand these psychological patterns, you begin seeing everyday interactions differently. A conversation can reveal a power dynamic. A repeated request can reveal entitlement. A person's reaction to your boundary can reveal how they viewed your access to them. Even silence can reveal information. And once you learn to recognize these signals, you stop giving your power away without realizing it. So pay close attention to every principle, because some of the most important lessons will appear in places where most people never think to look. Respect rarely disappears overnight. It usually fades through small permissions, and it can often be rebuilt through small decisions. The question is whether you are ready to change those decisions. Welcome to our channel, where we explore the psychology behind human behavior, influence, confidence, relationships, and personal power. If you want to understand people at a deeper level and build a stronger presence without begging for approval, make sure you subscribe to the channel. Now let us begin with the first principle, because the first mistake people make when trying to become valuable is trying far too hard to prove that they already are. The first mistake people make when they want to be respected is trying too hard to prove that they deserve respect. It sounds harmless at first. You mention your achievements. You explain how capable you are. You tell people how much you have sacrificed. You make sure everyone knows how successful you have become. You bring attention to your intelligence, your connections, your experience, your discipline, or the things you own. The intention is simple. You want people to recognize your value. Yet psychology reveals a strange problem with this approach. The harder you work to convince people that you are valuable, the more you can accidentally communicate that you need them to believe it. This is where impression management enters the picture. Impression management is the process of shaping how other people perceive you through your words, behavior, appearance, and social choices. Everyone does it to some degree. People choose certain clothes for an interview. They speak differently around a new group. They mention achievements during important conversations. They try to appear confident when they feel nervous. There is nothing unusual about managing an impression. The problem begins when impression management becomes obvious. When every conversation becomes an opportunity to advertise yourself, people can begin paying attention to the effort behind the image rather than the value of the person. A confident person can say, "I know how to handle this," and then handle it. An insecure person may spend 10 minutes explaining why they are the person who should handle it. The difference is subtle, but people notice it. One person provides evidence. The other provides a sales pitch. And human beings are constantly collecting these small signals. They are asking themselves, often without consciously realizing it, whether your behavior matches your claims. If someone constantly talks about being disciplined, but repeatedly arrives late, the contradiction becomes more memorable than the claim. If someone constantly talks about being successful, but desperately seeks approval, the behavior can weaken the image they are trying to create. If someone repeatedly tells everyone that they are highly intelligent, but turns every discussion into an opportunity to prove they are right, people may begin questioning their confidence rather than admiring their intelligence. This is why announcing your value is usually weaker than demonstrating it. Results require fewer words. Competence has a way of becoming visible. When you solve problems, people notice. When you remain calm under pressure, people notice. When you keep your promises, people notice. When you become skilled at something difficult, people notice. When you consistently make good decisions, people notice. You do not have to remind them every day. Your behavior keeps reminding them for you. This is one of the most powerful principles behind perceived status. People often form judgments from repeated patterns rather than isolated statements. One impressive story can create attention. A consistent pattern creates credibility. One confident speech can create curiosity. Repeated competence creates trust. One dramatic display can make people look at you. Quiet consistency can make them take you seriously. That is why you should stop turning every conversation into a performance. You do not need to win every argument. You do not need to correct every person. You do not need to mention every accomplishment. You do not need to make every room aware of what you are capable of doing. Sometimes the strongest response is simply doing the work well and allowing the result to exist without an announcement. There is also a deeper reason this works. When you constantly seek recognition, you give other people control over your sense of value. Their praise becomes a reward. Their silence becomes a threat. Their criticism becomes a personal attack. Their approval becomes something you start chasing. Eventually, you may begin making decisions based on how those decisions will look to other people rather than whether those decisions are right for you. That is where the desire for respect quietly turns into dependence on validation. The person who needs recognition has to keep performing. The person who has built internal confidence can keep moving even when nobody applauds. This does not mean hiding your achievements or refusing to accept praise. It means allowing your achievements to support your identity, rather than using them to create your identity. There is a major difference between saying, "I am valuable because everyone sees what I have accomplished," and knowing, "I have accomplished valuable things, but I do not need constant attention to feel secure." The second position is far more stable. It also changes how you behave around other people. You become less eager to impress. You listen more carefully. You speak with greater precision. You stop filling every silence with explanations. You stop competing for attention. You become comfortable letting other people underestimate you temporarily because you understand that reality eventually reveals competence. This is where the darker psychological insight becomes important. People are often influenced less by what you claim about yourself and more by what your repeated behavior allows them to conclude. If you say you are confident but constantly seek reassurance, they see the reassurance seeking. If you say you are independent but panic, whenever someone withdraws attention, they see the dependency. If you say you are successful but constantly compare yourself with everyone around you, they see the insecurity beneath the achievement. Your behavior becomes evidence, and evidence is difficult to replace with words. So stop announcing what you can do and start building the ability to do it. Stop explaining why you deserve respect and start behaving in ways that make disrespect less reasonable. Stop chasing recognition from every person you meet and start developing skills that remain valuable, even when nobody is watching. Let your results arrive before your reputation. Let your consistency become your introduction. Let your competence become your proof. Because the person who truly knows their value rarely needs to turn every interaction into an advertisement. Their standards are visible. Their discipline is visible. Their decisions are visible. Their calmness is visible. And over time, those patterns create impression far stronger than any declaration ever could. The easiest person to manipulate is often the person who feels they cannot afford to lose you. This is where interpersonal power becomes far more complicated than simply being confident or strong. Power inside a relationship rarely exists in isolation. It develops between people through dependence. One person has something the other person strongly wants, needs, or fears losing. And that difference creates leverage. It could be attention. It could be affection. It could be money. It could be friendship. It could be approval. It could even be the feeling of being accepted. The moment your emotional stability depends heavily on another person's behavior, that person gains influence over your decisions. This does not mean they are automatically manipulative or malicious. Sometimes they may have no intention of controlling you at all. The important point is that dependence itself can create a power imbalance. Consider what happens when you desperately need someone's approval. Their opinion suddenly becomes heavier than everyone else's. A small criticism can ruin your mood. A delayed response can create anxiety. A change in their tone can make you question yourself. You begin adjusting your behavior to keep their approval. You may agree with things you disagree with. You may accept treatment you would normally reject. You may apologize when you did nothing wrong simply because you fear losing the relationship. Slowly, your decisions become about what you genuinely want and more about preventing someone else from becoming unhappy with you. That is how dependency quietly turns into leverage. The same pattern can appear with friendship. If one person becomes your entire social world, losing that friendship can feel like losing your entire identity. That fear makes boundaries harder to maintain. You tolerate disrespect because isolation feels worse. You keep chasing the relationship because the alternative feels emotionally unbearable. The answer is not becoming cold or refusing to care about anyone. The answer is building a life that does not collapse when one person changes their mind. This begins by creating multiple sources of support. Maintain friendships outside one relationship. Stay connected with family or trusted people when appropriate. Develop interests that belong to you. Build communities around work, learning, fitness, creativity, or shared goals. The more complete your life becomes, the less one person's approval controls your emotional state. Your social world should give you connection without making one individual responsible for your entire sense of belonging. The same principle applies to skills. When you depend on other people to solve every problem, you become easier to pressure. When you develop your own abilities, your choices expand. Learn how to communicate clearly. Learn how to manage your responsibilities. Learn practical skills. Develop professional competence. Become capable of solving problems without immediately searching for someone to rescue you. Competence creates options, and options reduce dependency. Financial independence matters for the same reason. Money is not simply about comfort. It can influence how freely a person can make decisions. Someone who has no financial alternatives may tolerate situations that someone with more independence could leave. Building financial stability does not mean becoming obsessed with wealth. It means creating enough control over your resources that fear does not make every decision for you. Emotional independence is equally important. This means learning how to experience discomfort without immediately asking someone else to remove it. Rejection hurts. Criticism can sting. Loneliness can feel heavy. Uncertainty can create anxiety. But the ability to tolerate those feelings changes your relationship with other people. You become less desperate to fix every uncomfortable moment. You can hear someone say no without immediately trying to convince them. You can receive criticism without collapsing. You can accept that someone may misunderstand you without spending hours defending yourself. You can experience distance without chasing the person who created it. This is where rejection becomes a powerful teacher. Many people spend their lives trying to avoid rejection. Yet, avoiding rejection can create a much deeper problem. It can train you to abandon yourself whenever another person disapproves. You start treating rejection as proof that you are losing something essential. Instead, rejection can teach you that your life continues. Someone can reject an invitation. Someone can dislike your decision. Someone can end a friendship. Someone can lose interest. These events can hurt, but they do not have to control your identity. The more rejection you learn to tolerate, the less power rejection has over your behavior. This is why becoming comfortable walking away is so important. Walking away does not mean abandoning people at the first disagreement. It means recognizing that access to you is a choice, and access to others is also their choice. You cannot control whether someone stays. You can control whether you continue participating in a relationship that repeatedly damages your dignity. A person who knows they can survive without a specific relationship becomes harder to pressure. They can negotiate without desperation. They can disagree without panic. They can say no without immediately calculating the possibility of abandonment. They can care deeply without surrendering their entire emotional balance. This is the central shift: care without dependence, connection without desperation, love without self-abandonment. The less someone can control your emotional state, the less power they have over you. If someone can make you angry with one sentence, they have discovered leverage. If they can make you chase them through silence, they have discovered leverage. If they can make you abandon your standards through the threat of leaving, they have discovered leverage. But when you can pause, think, and choose your response, that leverage begins to disappear. Your goal is therefore not to become impossible to hurt. That is unrealistic. Your goal is to become difficult to control through your pain. Build skills, build options, build relationships, build financial stability, build emotional resilience. Build a life that remains meaningful even when another person changes their behavior toward you. When your entire world does not depend on one person's approval, their ability to manipulate your choices becomes dramatically smaller, and your relationships begin to operate from choice rather than fear. Your attention has value, but people often teach others to treat it as if it has none. This happens when you become available for everyone, at every hour, for every request, without limits. You answer messages the second they arrive. You interrupt your own plans because someone suddenly needs you. You accept calls while working. You give advice when you are exhausted. You keep responding even when the conversation has already drained you. Over time, this behavior can create an unexpected psychological effect. People become accustomed to having access to you. Your attention comes expected instead of appreciated. This is where the psychology of scarcity becomes important. Scarcity does not mean pretending to be busy. It does not mean ignoring people to make them chase you. It does not mean waiting 6 hours before answering a message simply to create an image of importance. Those are games, and games eventually become obvious. Real scarcity comes from having a life that already contains meaningful priorities. When your time is organized around your goals, responsibilities, relationships, health, learning, and personal interests, you naturally become less available because your attention has somewhere important to go. That difference is powerful. There is a major psychological gap between a person who is unavailable because they are playing a strategy and a person who is unavailable because they genuinely have a life to manage. The first person is performing scarcity. The second person is living it. Think about what happens when someone knows they can reach you at any moment. They may begin expecting instant responses. A message arrives, and they assume you will answer. A request appears, and they assume you will help. A problem develops, and they assume you will drop what you are doing. Eventually, your availability becomes part of their expectations. Then the first time you say no, they may act as if you have changed. In reality, you have simply stopped giving unlimited access. This is why boundaries around attention matter. Your attention is one of the few resources you spend every day without being able to recover it. Money can be earned again. Objects can be replaced. Time cannot. Yet many people protect their money more carefully than they protect their attention. They will think twice before spending a small amount of cash, but they will give an entire evening to a conversation they never wanted to have. They will carefully organize their work schedule, then abandon it whenever someone sends a message. They will make plans for their own future, then repeatedly sacrifice those plans to keep other people comfortable. The result is exhaustion, frustration, and a strange feeling that everyone else has access to their life, while they barely have access to their own. One of the simplest changes is learning that every message does not require an immediate response. A message is a request for attention, not a command. You can respond when you are free. You can finish your work first. You can enjoy your meal. You can spend time with your family. You can rest. You can simply choose to be present where you already are. This does not make you rude. It means you understand that attention should be directed rather than constantly interrupted. The same principle applies to favors. Helping people can be generous and meaningful, but endless availability can turn generosity into an expectation. If you always cancel your plans to help someone, they may stop seeing your help as a gift and start seeing it as a service they can request whenever they want. This is why you should become comfortable saying, "I cannot do that today," without creating a long explanation. You are allowed to have priorities. You are allowed to finish your work. You are allowed to rest. You are allowed to protect time that belongs to you. Another important shift is learning to stop treating every person as equally entitled to your attention. Attention should follow importance. Your responsibilities deserve attention. Your health deserves attention. Your goals deserve attention. Your closest relationships deserve attention. A random demand from someone who rarely considers your needs does not automatically deserve the same priority. This is where intentional attention becomes a form of self-respect. You decide where your energy goes instead of allowing every notification to decide for you. There is also a subtle social effect. When your attention becomes less automatic, people may become more aware of its value. They recognize that speaking with you requires timing. Your presence becomes associated with choice rather than obligation. This does not mean making yourself difficult to reach for emotional effect. It means making your presence meaningful because you are actually present when you choose to give it. Someone who is always half present, constantly checking messages, constantly rushing between conversations, and constantly promising to help can be far less valuable than someone who gives focused attention for a limited amount of time. Quality can create more value than quantity. The goal is therefore not to become distant. It is to become intentional. Answer when you have the mental space to answer. Help when helping fits your values and responsibilities. Meet people when you genuinely have the time. Protect your important plans. Keep promises you make to yourself with the same seriousness you give promises to others. When you stop giving everyone unlimited access, you also begin discovering who genuinely respects you. Some people will understand. Others may become irritated because they were benefiting from your constant availability. That reaction can reveal a great deal. A healthy relationship can survive reasonable boundaries. A relationship built around unlimited access may struggle when access becomes limited. This is why scarcity should come from having a life, not from pretending to be unavailable. Build a soul you care about. Build goals that require your attention. Build relationships that deserve your presence. Build habits that protect your future. Then your reduced availability will happen naturally. You will answer later because you were working. You will decline because you already made a commitment. You will leave your phone untouched because you were focused on something important. And when you finally give someone your attention, it will carry more meaning because it was chosen rather than automatically surrendered. One of the fastest ways to weaken your own boundaries is to explain them until they sound like requests for permission. A simple decision can become complicated the moment you feel responsible for making everyone understand and approve of it. Someone asks you to do something, and you know you cannot. Instead of simply saying, "I cannot make it," you begin building a case. You explain your schedule. You explain what happened yesterday. You explain why you are tired. You explain what you need to finish. You explain how much you already have going on. Then you add another reason because you are worried the first one will not be convincing enough. Before you realize it, a simple decision has turned into a negotiation. The other person now has several points they can challenge. They can tell you that your schedule can change. They can tell you that your other responsibility can wait. They can suggest another solution. They can question whether you are really that tired. They can offer to make things easier. Your original decision becomes buried beneath an argument about whether your reasons are acceptable. This is where assertiveness becomes important. Assertiveness means communicating your position clearly while respecting the other person's right to have their own response. It does not require aggression. It does not require hostility. It requires clarity. That does not work for me. You are communicating a decision. When you say, I have decided differently, you are communicating a decision. When you say, I am not comfortable with that, you are communicating a personal boundary. These statements leave less room for unnecessary negotiation because they focus on your decision rather than presenting a long list of evidence that someone else can debate. There is a psychological reason people over-explain. Often, the real problem is discomfort. You know what you want to say, but you are afraid of how the other person will react. You want them to understand, you want them to agree, you want them to see that you are reasonable. So you keep talking. You believe another explanation will finally make them accept your decision. Yet there is a hidden trap. The more approval you require before enforcing a boundary, the less independent that boundary becomes. You are technically making your own decision, but emotionally you are waiting for permission. This is why confident communication often sounds surprisingly simple. I cannot do that. I will not be available. That does not work for me. I have decided to take a different approach. I am not comfortable continuing this conversation. There is strength in these sentences because they communicate enough information without surrendering control of the decision. This does not mean you should become secretive or refuse to explain yourself in every situation. There are moments when a detailed explanation is appropriate. At work, important decisions may require context. In close relationships, honest communication can require deeper discussion. When your actions directly affect another person, explaining your reasoning can show respect. The point is not to eliminate explanations. The point is to stop using explanations as a way to convince people that your boundary deserves to exist. There is a difference between explaining and defending. Explaining gives information. Defending asks the other person to prove your position. Once you recognize this difference, many conversations become easier. Someone asks why you cannot attend an event. You can say, I already have a commitment. You do not need to describe every detail of that commitment. Someone asks you to lend money. You can say, I am unable to do that. You do not need to provide a complete report of your finances. Someone pushes you toward a decision you have already made. You can say, I have decided differently. You do not need to prove that your decision is objectively superior. Someone keeps pressuring you after you have answered. You can repeat the same boundary calmly instead of creating 5 new explanations. This is sometimes called the broken record approach in assertive communication. You calmly repeat the essential point without becoming aggressive or getting dragged into endless debate. The more emotional the other person becomes, the more useful simplicity can become. Long explanations create more material for conflict. Clear statements reduce unnecessary openings. This is especially important when dealing with people who regularly challenge boundaries. If they know you feel uncomfortable saying no, they may keep asking questions until they find the weakness in your reasoning. They may focus on one detail and ignore the actual decision. They may challenge your motives. They may tell you that you are being selfish. They may remind you of everything they have done for you. If you keep explaining, you may eventually start defending yourself against accusations you never needed to accept. A calm boundary can prevent that spiral. You do not need to win the argument. You need to remain clear about your decision. There is also a deeper psychological shift happening here. Every time you make a reasonable decision without excessive justification, you teach yourself that your choices can exist without universal approval. That builds internal confidence. You begin trusting your own judgment. You become less frightened by disagreement. You stop treating another person's disappointment as evidence that you made the wrong choice. This changes your presence because your communication becomes slower, clearer, and more deliberate. You speak because you have something to communicate, rather than because silence makes you anxious. And eventually you understand one of the hardest lessons about boundaries. A decision does not become valid because everyone understands it. A boundary does not become reasonable because everyone agrees with it. Sometimes another person will remain disappointed. Sometimes they will misunderstand you. Sometimes they will criticize your choice. You can still remain respectful without surrendering your position. A boundary that requires a courtroom defense is often a boundary you are still afraid to own. Your emotions can become a source of power for other people when they learn exactly how to trigger them. This is one of the most overlooked parts of human behavior, because emotional reactions often feel automatic. Someone says one sentence, and suddenly your mood changes. Someone ignores you, and your mind starts searching for an explanation. Someone criticizes you, and you immediately begin defending yourself. Someone becomes distant, and you feel an urge to chase them. Someone mentions another person, and jealousy appears before you even have time to think. These reactions can feel deeply personal, but they also reveal information. Every strong reaction teaches people something about you. If someone learns that a certain comment instantly makes you angry, they have discovered a psychological button. If they learn that silence makes you anxious, they have discovered another. If they learn that criticism makes you desperate to prove yourself, they have found another opening. The person may use this knowledge deliberately, or they may simply notice the pattern through repeated interactions. Either way, the result is similar. Your emotional reaction becomes predictable, and once a reaction becomes predictable, it becomes easier to influence. This is where emotional regulation becomes a form of personal power. Emotional regulation does not mean becoming emotionless. It means creating enough space between what happens and what you do next to make a deliberate choice. Anger can be real without controlling your behavior. Fear can be real without controlling your decisions. Disappointment can be real without turning into desperation. You can feel something strongly and still choose what happens next. That small space between stimulus and response can completely change the way people experience you. Consider what happens during an argument. Someone says something designed to provoke you. You respond immediately. Your voice becomes louder. You start explaining. They interrupt you. You become even more frustrated. Now, the conversation is no longer about the original issue. It has become about your reaction. The other person has shifted the center of the interaction from their behavior to your emotions. You may spend the next hour defending yourself while the original problem disappears. A pause could have changed the entire interaction. Take a breath. Slow your voice. Let the first wave of emotion pass before answering. You do not have to respond at the exact speed someone provokes you. A delayed response can be more powerful than an immediate reaction because it gives you time to decide whether the situation deserves your energy at all. This is especially important when someone knows your insecurities. People close to you often learn your emotional patterns. They know which subjects make you defensive. They know what makes you jealous. They know what kind of criticism hurts you most. They know when you are afraid of losing them. They know which words make you question yourself. In healthy relationships, this knowledge can create empathy and understanding. In unhealthy relationships, the same knowledge can become leverage. That is why emotional privacy matters. You do not need to reveal every insecurity to every person. You do not need to explain every fear. You do not need to show someone exactly how much their approval controls you. The more someone understands about your emotional triggers, the more important it becomes that you understand them yourself. Self-awareness turns hidden weaknesses into manageable information. When you know that rejection makes you chase, you can recognize the urge before acting on it. When you know criticism over-explain, you can pause before defending yourself. When you know silence makes you anxious, you can resist the impulse to send 5 messages simply to remove the discomfort. This is where the psychological principle becomes practical. Pause before responding. Breathe slowly. Give your nervous system time to settle. Ask yourself what actually happened. Separate the event from the story your mind immediately created around it. Then choose your response. This process may sound simple, but it can completely change your relationships because people eventually learn what they can and cannot control. If anger always gets a reaction, anger becomes useful against you. If guilt always makes you surrender, guilt becomes useful against you. If withdrawal always makes you chase, withdrawal becomes useful against you. But when those tactics stop producing automatic reactions, their influence becomes weaker. You are still allowed to be angry. You are still allowed to feel hurt. You are still allowed to walk away from disrespect. The difference is that your actions come from a decision rather than an emotional reflex. This is also why calmness should never be confused with weakness. A person who stays calm during pressure is often harder to manipulate because their behavior is less predictable to the person trying to provoke them. They cannot easily tell which sentence will create an explosion. They cannot easily create panic by withholding attention. They cannot easily push you into a defensive position. You become harder to steer through emotional pressure because you have learned to regulate yourself first. The goal is never to suppress every emotion or pretend that nothing affects you. Suppression can create its own problems. The goal is awareness and control. Feel the anger, but decide what anger deserves. Feel the disappointment, but decide whether it deserves a confrontation. Feel the fear, but decide whether the fear should make the decision. Feel the urge to defend yourself, but ask whether an explanation will actually improve the situation. The strongest shift happens when you stop giving people automatic access to your emotional reactions. They can speak. They can criticize. They can disagree. They can leave. They can attempt to provoke you. But they do not get to decide what happens inside your mind next. You decide whether the emotion becomes a reaction, a lesson, a boundary, or simply a feeling that passes. And once you learn to control that space between provocation and response, other people lose one of the easiest ways to control your behavior. Words can describe a boundary, but behavior gives that boundary its real weight. This is where many people lose authority without realizing it. They tell someone, "Do not speak to me like that again." But when the same behavior happens a week later, they continue the conversation as if nothing happened. They say, "I will leave if this keeps happening." But they remain in exactly the same situation. They say, "I cannot keep doing this," and then continue doing it because they feel guilty about disappointing the other person. Over time, people learn from this pattern. They may hear your words, but they pay attention to what happens afterward. Human behavior is strongly influenced by consequences. When a behavior repeatedly produces a reward, access, attention, forgiveness, or another desired result, that behavior can become more likely to continue. This is the basic idea behind behavioral reinforcement, and it explains why boundaries without follow-through often become empty statements. Consider a person who repeatedly speaks to you with disrespect. You tell them that their behavior is unacceptable, but you continue the conversation every time. Eventually, your warning becomes predictable but harmless. They learn that your words create a temporary argument, but the relationship remains unchanged. A stronger response is often much simpler. End the conversation. Step away. Return when the situation is calm, if returning is appropriate. You do not need to deliver a dramatic speech every time. Your action communicates the boundary more clearly than another explanation could. The same principle applies to manipulation. If someone repeatedly pressures you, guilt-trips you, or tries to make you feel responsible for their choices, you do not have to fight them every time they use the tactic. You can reduce the amount of access they have to your attention. You can stop sharing personal information. You can shorten conversations. You can refuse requests. You can create distance. The important part is consistency. If you respond strongly one day and surrender the next day, the pattern becomes difficult to understand and easy to test. A person may keep pushing simply to discover whether your boundary is real this time. Consistency removes that uncertainty. Broken agreements also change the way trust should work. Trust is not only a feeling. It is built through repeated evidence. When someone repeatedly breaks promises, you do not need to announce that they are a terrible person. You can simply adjust the amount of trust you give them. Perhaps you stop depending on them for important responsibilities. Perhaps you stop sharing sensitive information. Perhaps you make independent plans instead of relying on promises that have repeatedly failed. Your behavior becomes the consequence. You are not punishing them. You are responding to information. This distinction matters because boundaries should protect you rather than become weapons for controlling other people. The same idea applies to constant criticism. If someone repeatedly attacks your choices, appearance, goals, or character, you do not need to spend every conversation proving that they are wrong. You can reduce your availability to that person. You can change the subjects you discuss. You can leave conversations that become disrespectful. You can create more distance when the pattern continues. Again, the power comes from consistency rather than drama. Dramatic announcements often create emotional battles. Quiet follow-through creates a pattern that is much harder to argue with. There is also a psychological lesson for you personally. Every time you enforce a boundary you said you would enforce, you build trust in yourself. You begin learning that your own words mean something. This matters because self-respect is partly built through the relationship you have with your own decisions. When you repeatedly promise yourself that you will stop accepting a certain behavior and then ignore your own promise, you weaken your confidence in your ability to protect yourself. When you follow through calmly, you reinforce another message. I can trust myself to act when something crosses my standard. This does not mean every disagreement requires distance. Healthy relationships involve mistakes, misunderstandings, forgiveness, and negotiation. The goal is to distinguish between an isolated mistake and a repeated pattern. Someone makes a mistake, takes responsibility, and changes their behavior. That is different from someone who repeatedly crosses the same boundary, apologizes only when consequences appear, and then returns to the same behavior. Patterns deserve responses based on patterns. You also do not need to threaten consequences in advance. Threats often turn boundaries into contests. Someone may begin testing whether you are serious. They may challenge you directly. They may say you will never follow through. Instead of arguing about what you might do, simply know what you will do and act accordingly when the line is crossed. If a conversation becomes disrespectful, you end it. If someone repeatedly misuses personal information, you stop sharing it. If someone continually breaks agreements, you reduce your dependence on them. If someone repeatedly ignores your boundaries, you create more distance. These actions are clear because they are connected to behavior. They also preserve your dignity because you are not trying to force another person to change. You are deciding how you will participate. That is one of the most important differences between control and boundaries. Control says, you must behave differently. A boundary says, if this behavior continues, I will change participation. The second approach gives you control over your own choices without pretending you control another person. This is why the strongest boundary is the one quietly enforce. You do not need to announce every consequence. You do not need to threaten people. You do not need to create fear. You simply make your actions match your standards. Eventually, people learn that your boundaries are connected to reality. Because when a line is crossed, your behavior changes. Respect becomes much easier to build when you stop demanding that people see your value and start creating value that is difficult to ignore. This is the point where the entire idea shifts from defense to construction. The first rules were about protecting yourself, controlling your reactions, reducing unhealthy dependence, setting boundaries, and making your attention more intentional. But protection alone is not enough. You can become very good at saying no and still have very little substance behind your identity. You can become difficult to manipulate while remaining undisciplined. You can stop chasing approval while doing nothing meaningful with your time. Real confidence needs something underneath it. That foundation is competence. People naturally observe what others can do, how reliably they do it, and how they behave when pressure appears. Status is often shaped through these repeated signals. A person who consistently solves problems becomes associated with usefulness. A person who keeps promises becomes associated with reliability. A person who remains calm during difficult situations becomes associated with stability. A person who develops a valuable skill becomes associated with competence. These impressions rarely come from one dramatic performance. They develop through repeated evidence. This is why demanding respect before building substance can create an awkward contradiction. You may tell people to take you seriously, but your daily behavior gives them little reason to change their perception. You may demand recognition while avoiding difficult work. You may demand trust while constantly breaking promises. You may demand admiration while allowing your emotions to control every decision. Words cannot permanently cover those contradictions. Your behavior eventually becomes stronger evidence than your claims. Start with competence. Choose something worth becoming good at and develop it beyond the level of casual interest. Learn deeply. Practice consistently. Study your mistakes. Improve your weaknesses. Become the person others can rely on when a problem needs to be solved. Competence changes how you see yourself because every skill you develop becomes evidence that you can handle difficulty. Then build discipline. Discipline means doing what needs to be done, even when motivation disappears. It means keeping commitments to yourself when nobody is watching. It means choosing long-term benefits over immediate comfort. A disciplined person does not need to constantly announce their strength, because their habits reveal it, their schedule reveals it, consistency reveals it, their results reveal it. Reliability creates another layer of value. There are people who are talented but impossible to depend on. They make impressive promises and disappear when responsibility arrives. Then there are people who may speak less but consistently do what they said they would do. Over time, the second person can become far more respected because trust grows from predictability. If you say you will arrive, arrive. If you commit to something, take it seriously. If you make a mistake, own it. Reliability is simple, but it is rare enough to become powerful. Emotional stability matters just as much. Your competence loses some of its value when every criticism creates an emotional crisis. People notice how you behave under pressure. They notice whether you become defensive when corrected. They notice whether frustration makes you reckless. They notice whether disagreement turns into personal conflict. Emotional stability does not mean feeling nothing. It means you can experience strong emotions without allowing them to control every action. This creates a sense of security around you because people know that pressure will not instantly destroy your judgment. Knowledge adds another layer. Learn beyond the surface, read, ask better questions. Understand your field, understand people, understand your own patterns. Knowledge becomes valuable when it improves your decisions and allows you to contribute something useful to conversations and problems. But knowledge without communication can remain invisible. This is why communication skills matter. Learn to speak clearly. Learn to listen carefully. Learn when to speak and when to stop. Learn how to disagree without turning every disagreement into a battle. A person who can explain complicated ideas simply often creates a stronger impression than someone who uses complicated words to sound intelligent. Your physical and mental health also influence the way you carry yourself. Your energy affects your presence. Your habits affect your confidence. Your ability to care for yourself communicates something about your priorities. This does not mean chasing a perfect appearance. It means respecting the body and mind that carry you through your life. Financial responsibility adds another form of independence. You do not need extraordinary wealth to have value, but learning to manage your resources gives you more freedom. Spending less than you earn, planning ahead, developing useful skills, and avoiding unnecessary dependence can reduce the pressure that forces people into choices they would otherwise reject. Then there are personal standards. Standards are the rules you create for how you live and what you accept. They influence the people you allow close to you, the work you produce, the promises you keep, and the environments you tolerate. Standards become meaningful when they affect your behavior. A person who says, "I have high standards," but accepts everything out of fear has preferences, not standards. A person who quietly chooses according to those standards has built something stronger. This is why the goal should never be to spend your life demanding a higher position. Build a life that gives people reasons to recognize your contribution. Become skilled, become reliable, become disciplined, become emotionally steady, become knowledgeable, communicate well, take care of yourself, manage your resources, protect your standards. Over time, these qualities begin working together. You become someone whose presence carries evidence of effort and substance. You no longer need to convince every person of your value because your behavior has already created a pattern. And when people encounter that pattern repeatedly, respect becomes less about what you demand and more about what your life naturally demonstrates. The person who speaks the most in every room often believes they are controlling the conversation, but they may be giving away more information than they realize. Every explanation reveals a preference. Every personal story reveals a weakness, a goal, a fear, or a value. Every unnecessary detail gives other people more material to interpret. Meanwhile, the person who listens carefully can learn far more than the person who is constantly trying to be heard. This is where social perception becomes powerful. Human beings reveal themselves through patterns, especially when they become comfortable enough to stop managing their behavior carefully. In the beginning, Most people present a version of themselves they want others to see. They choose their words carefully. They highlight their strengths. They hide certain weaknesses. Try to appear confident, successful, kind, intelligent, or interesting. But maintaining an image requires effort, and effort becomes harder to sustain over time. Eventually, ordinary behavior starts revealing more than carefully chosen words. This is why observation matters. Instead of asking only what someone says, pay attention to what they repeatedly do. Watch how they behave when pressure arrives. Pressure removes some of the comfort that allows people to carefully manage an impression. Someone who appears calm and respectful during easy situations may become aggressive when challenged. Someone who talks constantly about loyalty may disappear when you need support. Someone who presents themselves as kind may treat people poorly when there is no social reward for being polite. Pressure can reveal priorities because difficult moments force choices. Another powerful signal is how a person treats people they believe cannot benefit them. Watch how they speak to service workers, junior employees, strangers, or anyone with less social power. Respect that only appears when someone important is watching may be performance. Consistent respect across different situations tells you far more about character. You should also watch how people respond to disagreement. A healthy person can hear a different opinion without immediately turning the other person into an enemy. They may challenge your ideas, but they can still respect your right to think differently. Someone who needs constant agreement may react with anger, ridicule, withdrawal, or pressure whenever you refuse to follow their position. That reaction provides information. Then look at the gap between promises and behavior. Words can create an impressive image very quickly. Actions take time. Someone may promise to help you, support you, respect your boundaries, or change a certain behavior. The important question is what happens after the conversation ends. Does the behavior actually change? Does the promise become a pattern? Or does the same behavior return once the immediate pressure disappears? This is where observation becomes more reliable than excitement. People can say almost anything during an emotional conversation. Patterns are harder to fake for long periods. Another revealing moment appears when someone wants something from you. Notice how their communication changes when they need your help, attention, money, access, or approval. Some people become unusually warm when they want a favor and distant when they no longer need anything. Others suddenly become persuasive, flattering, or emotionally intense. This does not automatically mean manipulation. Everyone behaves differently when they need something. The important part is whether the pattern repeats and whether the relationship remains balanced when there is nothing to gain. One of the strongest tests is your ability to say no. A respectful person may be disappointed, but they can accept your decision. A controlling person may treat your no as an obstacle that needs to be defeated. They may pressure you, guilt you, question your motives, or continue asking in different ways until you surrender. That reaction tells you more than their previous compliments ever could. Your no reveals their expectations about access to you. This is where information becomes a form of social leverage, but leverage should be understood carefully. The goal is not to collect secrets and use them against people. The goal is awareness. When you understand someone's patterns, you can make better decisions about trust, closeness, and boundaries. You can stop giving deep access to people who repeatedly demonstrate that they cannot handle it responsibly. You can avoid confusing charm with character. You can separate promises from evidence. You can recognize when someone respects you because they genuinely value you, and when they are simply being pleasant because they want something. At the same time, you should protect your own information. You do not need to tell everyone your plans, insecurities, financial details, private relationships, fears, or future decisions. Privacy gives you room to think before other people's opinions begin influencing your choices. The moment you announce every goal, everyone has an opinion about it. Someone tells you that your plan will fail. Someone tells you that you are moving too quickly. Someone becomes jealous. Someone tries to change your direction. Sometimes the best thing you can do is build quietly until you have enough evidence to know where you are going. Speaking less does not mean becoming socially awkward or distant. It means becoming more intentional with what you reveal. Ask questions. Listen to answers. Notice contradictions. Watch patterns over time. Let people demonstrate who they are instead of rushing to decide who they are. And remember that observation works both ways. Other people are observing you too. Your reactions, promises, boundaries, and treatment of others all create information about your character. The goal is therefore not to become a mysterious person who hides everything. The goal is to become a person who understands that trust should grow gradually and information should be shared thoughtfully. The less desperate you are to fill every silence, the more you begin noticing what happens inside that silence. People reveal priorities through choices, character through consistency, and intentions through repeated behavior. When you learn to observe without immediately judging, you gain something far more useful than control over other people. You gain clarity about who deserves your trust, who deserves limited access, and who has already shown you enough to make your decision. There comes a point in every relationship where the fear of losing someone can become more powerful than the desire to protect yourself. This is where emotional independence becomes one of the deepest forms of personal strength. When you desperately need someone to stay, your decisions can slowly change. You begin accepting things you once promised yourself you would never accept. You tolerate disrespect because the thought of losing the relationship feels worse than the treatment you are receiving. You forgive too quickly because you are afraid that another boundary might push the person away. You keep explaining yourself because you want them to understand. You keep chasing because silence feels unbearable. You keep giving chances because you believe the next chance might finally restore what the relationship used to be. Gradually, you begin negotiating against yourself. Your standards become flexible whenever someone threatens to leave. Your boundaries become weaker whenever you fear rejection. Your peace becomes dependent on another person's mood. And eventually, you may become so focused on keeping the relationship alive that you forget to ask whether the relationship is still healthy for you. This is the psychological trap created by emotional dependence. The person you fear losing can begin to hold enormous influence over your behavior. Their approval becomes a reward. Their distance becomes a punishment. Their silence becomes a source of anxiety. Their affection becomes something you feel you have to earn. You may begin monitoring every word, every message, every reaction, trying to prevent the relationship from changing. But there is a painful contradiction here. The harder you try to prevent someone from leaving, the more likely you are to abandon yourself in the process. You sacrifice your preferences. You hide your disappointment. You accept unfair treatment. You stop expressing disagreement. You become easier to control because the other person knows that losing them is your greatest fear. The psychological reversal begins when that fear loses its authority. This does not mean you stop caring. It means you stop believing that keeping someone is worth destroying your self-respect. You begin understanding that relationships are choices made by two people, not contracts where one person must constantly prove their worth to prevent abandonment. You can love someone deeply and still recognize that their behavior is unhealthy for you. You can value a friendship and still create distance when respect disappears. You can care about a relationship and still refuse to accept manipulation. You can miss someone and still know that returning to the same pattern would cost you too much. That is emotional independence. It is the ability to remain connected without becoming controlled by the fear of disconnection. Once you develop this ability, your behavior begins to change in ways other people can feel. Your voice becomes calmer because you are no longer speaking from desperation. Your boundaries become clearer because you are less afraid of the consequences. Your decisions become more honest because you are no longer calculating every choice around another person's reaction. You stop explaining every boundary simply to prevent someone from becoming upset. You stop chasing conversations that the other person has chosen to abandon. You stop begging for clarity from people who repeatedly create confusion. You stop accepting disrespect simply because the relationship has history. This is where willingness to walk away becomes important. Walking away should never be treated as a dramatic power move. It is not about punishing someone or making them regret losing you. It is about recognizing when continued access to your life is costing more than the relationship is giving back. Sometimes walking away means ending a relationship. Sometimes it means creating distance. Sometimes it means changing the amount of trust you give. Sometimes it means refusing to participate in the same argument again and again. The form can change, but the principle remains the same. Your life belongs to you. You are allowed to decide what kind of treatment you will participate in. You are allowed to leave situations that repeatedly violate your standards, and you are allowed to accept the pain that comes with making that decision. This because freedom does not mean avoiding every painful experience. Freedom means choosing your pain instead of allowing fear to choose it for you. There is also a surprising effect on relationships when you become less afraid of losing people. You become more honest. You can say what you actually think. You can disagree without panic. You can tell someone when they hurt you without immediately worrying that honesty will end the relationship. You can give people space without interpreting every moment of distance as abandonment. You can appreciate people without making them responsible for your entire emotional stability. Healthy relationships become easier to recognize because you are no longer measuring every interaction through the question, will this person leave? Instead, you begin asking, does this relationship respect both of us? That question creates a completely different standard. It shifts your attention from preserving access to preserving quality. You also become more selective about who receives your deepest trust. When you know you can survive someone's departure, you no longer need to rush intimacy. You can allow people to reveal themselves gradually. You can observe consistency. You can notice whether their actions match their words. You can enjoy connection without turning it into dependence. This is why the goal is never to become cold. Coldness is another form of defense. The goal is to become free, free enough to care without chasing, free enough to love without abandoning yourself, free enough to forgive without forgetting patterns, free enough to stay when a relationship is healthy, and free enough to leave when it repeatedly destroys your peace. The person who fears losing everyone eventually becomes controlled by everyone they fear losing. The person who understands that they can survive loss becomes much harder to manipulate through the threat of it. And once you reach that point, respect changes because you are no longer asking people to treat you well so that they will stay. You are choosing relationships where respect is already part of the foundation. The word force sounds powerful, but there is an important distinction hidden inside it. Genuine respect cannot be reliably forced through fear. Fear can make someone obey you for a moment. Intimidation can make someone stay quiet. Authority can make people follow instructions. But none of these automatically create genuine respect. A person can obey you while secretly resenting you. A person can remain silent because they feel threatened. A person can follow your orders because they have no better option. That is compliance, not necessarily respect. Respect operates differently because it involves how people evaluate your character, competence, consistency, and position. This distinction becomes especially important when we look at the difference between power and status. Power can give someone control over resources, decisions, opportunities, or consequences. Status is more closely connected to being valued, respected, admired, or regarded as important by others. A person can possess significant power while having very little genuine respect. They may control the room, but still create discomfort whenever they enter it. They may have authority but lack warmth. They may be obeyed because people have to obey them, rather than because people believe they deserve admiration. Research examining power and status helps explain this difference. High power can increase perceptions of dominance, but when power exists without status, it can also be associated with colder impressions. High status can communicate competence and importance, while also allowing room for warmth and social connection. This is why trying to dominate everyone can be such a poor strategy for building lasting respect. You may become intimidating, but you can also become isolated. People may become careful around you without becoming genuinely loyal to you. They may tell you what you want to hear while hiding what they actually think. They may follow your instructions while waiting for an opportunity to move away from your influence. Fear changes behavior from the outside. Respect changes behavior through internal evaluation. Someone who respects you does not simply fear what you might do. They recognize something about your character or ability that makes your presence meaningful. This is why the real strategy is to become difficult to exploit rather than difficult to approach. Being difficult to exploit means having boundaries that are clear, emotional reactions that are controlled, and standards that are consistent. It means people cannot easily use guilt to make you surrender. They cannot easily use silence to make you panic. They cannot easily use praise to make you abandon your judgment. They cannot easily use rejection to make you chase them. You become harder to manipulate because your decisions come from your values rather than from whatever emotional pressure is strongest in the moment. Become independent rather than intimidating. Independence gives you choices. Intimidation tries to remove choices from other people. One creates freedom, the other creates pressure. A truly independent person does not need to control every person around them because they are capable of walking away from relationships, environments, and situations that repeatedly violate their standards. Their strength comes from options rather than threats. Become competent rather than boastful. Competence creates evidence. Boasting creates claims. Anyone can describe what they are capable of doing. The stronger signal comes from repeatedly doing difficult things well. Your skills become part of your reputation. Your reliability becomes part of your reputation. Your ability to solve problems becomes part of your reputation. Eventually, people begin associating you with results rather than promises. Become calm rather than passive. These two qualities are often confused. Passivity means allowing other people to make decisions for you because confrontation feels uncomfortable. Calmness means you can recognize a problem without allowing anger to make the decision. You can say no without shouting. You can leave without creating a dramatic scene. You can disagree without turning disagreement into war. Calmness is active self-control. It allows you to respond instead of simply react. Become consistent rather than unpredictable. Unpredictability can create uncertainty, but consistency creates trust. When people know that your standards remain the same regardless of your mood, your boundaries become easier to understand. If disrespect always produces distance, people eventually understand the pattern. If always receives honesty from you, people learn what kind of interaction you value. If you keep your promises even when circumstances become inconvenient, your reliability becomes part of your identity. This is where all the previous principles connect. Your value becomes visible through your behavior. Your independence reduces unhealthy leverage. Your limited availability protects your attention. Your clear communication protects your boundaries. Your emotional regulation protects your decisions. Your consequences make your standards real. Your competence creates substance. Your observation gives you clarity. Your willingness to lose unhealthy relationships protects your freedom. None of these require you to become cruel. None require you to manipulate people into fearing you. They create something much more durable. They create a person whose behavior is difficult to dismiss. And when people encounter that kind of person repeatedly, they begin to understand that access comes with standards, trust comes with consistency, and respect comes from the way a person carries responsibility for their own life. The strongest presence in a room is therefore rarely the person trying hardest to dominate it. It is often the person who has nothing to prove, nothing to threaten, and nothing to chase, because their behavior already communicates where they stand. Respect does not begin when you demand it. It begins when your behavior makes your standards clear. Throughout this video, we explored 9 principles that can completely change the way people experience you. Stop proving your value, because genuine value becomes visible through consistent action. Reduce unhealthy dependency, because the less another person controls your emotional stability, the less leverage they have over your decisions. Control your availability, because your attention is valuable and should be given intentionally. Stop over-explaining, because a clear decision does not always require a long defense. Master your emotional reactions, because people lose influence over you when they can no longer control your behavior through anger, fear, guilt, or rejection. Enforce consequences, because a boundary becomes meaningful when your actions support your words. Build real competence, because confidence becomes stronger when there is ability behind it. Observe more than you reveal, because people often reveal their character through patterns, pressure, disagreement, broken promises, and their reaction when you say no. And finally, become willing to walk away, because the fear of losing someone can become the very thing that makes you tolerate what destroys your self-respect. Put all 9 principles together, and a deeper lesson appears. You do not need to dominate every room. You do not need the loudest voice. You do not need to prove that you are smarter, stronger, richer, or more important than everyone around you. You do not need everyone to like you. You need self-control. You need competence. You need boundaries. You need consistency. And above all, you need the ability to remain at peace, even when someone chooses to leave your life. Because the moment your self-respect depends on another person's approval, you give them a piece of your freedom. But when you become secure enough to stand on your own, your relationships begin to change. You stop chasing people who keep pulling away. You stop explaining yourself to people who have already decided to misunderstand you. You stop accepting disrespect simply because you are afraid of losing the relationship. You stop confusing attention with love and fear with respect. You begin choosing people who respect your standards instead of constantly testing them. Remember this: respect begins when your behavior tells people that access to you has standards. Your time has standards. Your attention has standards. Your trust has standards. Your emotional energy has standards. Your presence has standards. That does not make you arrogant. It makes you responsible for the life you are building. You are allowed to be kind without becoming easy to exploit. You are allowed to be generous without becoming endlessly available. You are allowed to forgive without reopening every door. You are allowed to love someone without allowing them to control you. You are allowed to walk away without becoming bitter. And you are allowed to choose peace over proving a point. The most powerful person is rarely the person demanding respect. It is the person who has built a life where disrespect comes with a price. Less access, less trust, less attention, and eventually, no access at all. That is the point where respect stops being something you chase and becomes something your behavior naturally communicates. So take a moment and ask yourself one final question. Which one of these 9 principles do you need to change first? Maybe you need to stop over-explaining. Maybe you need stronger boundaries. Maybe you need to stop chasing someone's approval. Maybe you need to become more independent. Whatever it is, start there. You do not need to transform your entire life overnight. One boundary can change a relationship. One decision can change a pattern. One act of self-respect can change the way you see yourself. If this video gave you a new perspective on respect, power, confidence, and human behavior, make sure you like this video and share it with someone who needs to hear this message. And if you want more videos about psychology, influence, emotional control, confidence, relationships, and personal power, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you do not miss the next one. Keep your standards high. Keep your emotions under your control. And remember, you do not become powerful by controlling other people. You become powerful when you become impossible to control against your own values.